So excited to introduce Ghada Al-Muhanna Abalkhail, a Saudi media and visual anthropologist and cultural and media advisor based out of Berlin. She focuses on the visual history of the Arabian Peninsula, and her work emphasizes the importance of storytelling, cultural preservation, and cultural exchange. Her passion for the region's identity drives her to use Twitter and Instagram and social media platforms to retell the stories of the Arabian Peninsula, reclaiming its narrative and challenging misconceptions. Super excited also to mention that Ghada is going to be a regular on the show in a segment titled 1727, where we really do kind of go into the history of the kingdom through visual tools. Welcome, Ghada.
Thanks for having me. Quite excited.
Let's start with you telling us a little bit about yourself and the very, very cool work that you do.
I'll start with the basics. I'm from Saudi Arabia. I grew up in Riyadh. After graduating high school, I decided to go into law, wanted to have a political career, and then did my master's in Michigan. Was like, this is the worst mistake I've ever made, ever. Why did I ever think I could be a lawyer? Went into politics and enjoyed it so much that I decided I want to be a researcher. And then that's when the revelation started, because I used to work as a counterterrorism researcher, and I was working specifically in women's, like, why do women join terrorist groups, studying how women kind of influence groups, how could they infiltrate them, and how they can actually be like the better terrorists, to say the least. Like, it's horrible to say it this way, but like, just that's what I was studying. So from there, I started noticing in, let's say, background conversations, and when I would talk to other think tankers, I noticed that they would be like surprised by the conclusions we would find in our studies. And there were certain stereotypes that certain researchers had about the region that made me go, okay, wait a second, this is really weird. Why would you think this way? And with time, I started realizing, oh, okay, this has to do with the lack of content that they have. There's a lot of, let's say, written content, but not much visual content. And so just for my own sake, I started to go into the archives and look for the content and still slowly start to pull it out. Obviously, this collided with the whole I'm very homesick. So I started pulling the photos, sometimes cry, sometimes look at them with like, oh, this is so interesting kind of vibes. And then I would share them online. And then over time, people started paying attention to the content, and I started noticing or started feeling, okay, I do have some sort of responsibility towards pushing out more and more content, explaining things. So yeah, that's how I ended up going through archives, searching through archives.
I mean, you focus on the representation of the Arabian Peninsula's culture and heritage mostly. So can you explain kind of what that means to you a little bit more and the inspiration behind that?
So I believe that the Arabian Peninsula hasn't had its fair share of being truly studied and represented appropriately in the media. Anytime you try to look for a story from the Arabian Peninsula, it's either written by a Westerner, an Easterner, or by someone in the Arab world that's not from the peninsula. So it's always someone else that tells the story. It's never the people of the peninsula as such. So personally, as someone who comes from there, I feel very motivated to tell the story, to talk about, okay, that's a perspective that you have, but we have a different perspective, and this is where it is.
So when you think about images that come to people's minds when they think about the Arabian Peninsula or Saudi Arabia in specific, what are those images?
Lawrence of Arabia is like the quickest answer. I mean, when you talk, I mean, it's very different when you talk to different groups of people around the world. So if you talk to Westerners, the first images that come to their mind is Lawrence of Arabia. Like when you talk to a lot of, let's say, older Westerners, and by older I mean like 50s and above, they would tell you like, yeah, I love Lawrence of Arabia. It was one of my favorite movies, which I mean, I don't blame them for that, but that's the image that they have in their minds. If you talk to someone a bit younger, they have certain conflicts in their mind. So they only see conflicts. People remember images of like, oh, the oil embargo, especially let's say if you talk to Americans, they remember those images, and so that's the connection that they have. If you ask people in my generation, I'm a millennial, they think of 9/11, you know, so it's a lot of it's different when you ask every other generation what do they think of the region, or what do they think of Saudi. You notice that visually they only think about the things that they've been given. So when you do look at the general media sphere that talks about the Arabian Peninsula, 80 to 90% of the time it's just negative imagery. Even when, let's say, the editors or the producers have thought, this doesn't look bad, and then they show it on TV, it's actually a really negative depiction of that community, society, culture, and so on.
Yeah, I mean, somebody else was telling me that they think of Aladdin. And I think that's true.
Aladdin is very conspicuous. He's not, you don't know if he's Southern Asian or if he's Middle Eastern. So it's like a blend of two cultures.
So many different cultures.
It's too weird.
But yeah, there is that, you know, the belly dancer. There is that image as well, right? So we have the conflict, as you mentioned, and then we also have kind of, you know, whatever media was really big, like Lawrence of Arabia or maybe Aladdin even.
Yeah, but it's also, sorry to interrupt, but it's also really important to note that, like, for example, it's even different when you look in the Middle East. So yes, for example, if you ask someone from China, what do you think of Saudis or Arabians? They think, oh, belly dancers.
Right.
But if you ask an Egyptian, what do you think of Arabians or Lebanese or whatever nationality, they would say, or Saudis, or like, what do they think of the Peninsula people? Not all of them, but there are some that say, oh yeah, like Bedouins that just traverse the desert. So everyone has a very different experience to the visual of the Arabian Peninsula, and we don't even have an experience with our own visuals. So it's a very interesting thing to deal with. Yeah.
Tell me what you mean by that we don't have an experience with our own visuals.
I mean, consider this. The first TV in Saudi was in 1960. The TV station was in 1969. And it was probably the first to broadcast in the entire region. From what I know, Oman was probably the last in the 70s. So that's a pretty late development to enter into, let's say, the field of producing your own images and trying to kind of alter a little bit the stereotypical, let's say, perceptions people have of you. But also, let's not forget, if the station started in 1969, they only had about 10 years to correct an image until this other image came through with let's say, the siege of Mecca, the Islamic Revolution in Iran, all these things that changed the tide of the region and change the perspective of the regions, and especially within the case of the Arabian Peninsula, becoming more conservative, becoming more restrictive, and wishing to kind of not create images in the name of God. And so slowly not producing your own images, which then leaves the door open for people to come in and kind of describe who you are to yourself, where at some point you do have younger generations who start believing in these narratives and saying like, yeah, I am that regressive Bedouin that had nothing to do, that had no homes in the desert.
Right. No history.
No history. Yeah.
Yeah. You hear that a lot. And younger generations, if they're not inquisitive, really do fall into that trap. I've heard it a lot. I hear it with my own children sometimes when I say, what do you think of when you think Saudi? And they'll say hot. And I'm like, really, guys? We've had this conversation before. But so tell me about the process, the archival process and the research that you do, because I think it's fascinating. You're finding images that many of us have never seen before.
I really don't think that's true. I think everyone has seen these photographs, or at least some of the photographs before. The only difference is we're seeing it now from a different perspective. So what we are used to is someone showing us a picture and saying, this is the picture, accept it as it is and move on. So I'll give you like a quick example. I would tell you like, oh, Hana, this is one of the older houses in Taif. Okay. And then I would say, accept it, don't inquisite, and then move on. This is what we've seen for many years. What we haven't seen is someone holding up the picture and saying, why are the windows green? What possessed them to design things this way? What made the photographer take this picture? How and why? So asking these questions is the new thing that's going on at the moment, and I do think it's because of the cultural revolution we're having at the moment in the kingdom, where people are becoming quite inquisitive about the culture, about where's your position, what's your identity in this world, where do you place yourself, and I think we're at a point also that we're just done being told who we are. And therefore, it's kind of like the whole nation is in a search. I think we just need to look at the raw content and really expose ourselves to, let's say, our history. And that's when our questions start. Like, okay, how do we as a society that has no archive, that has actually consistently for 30 years eliminated any form of cultural expression, or like, it wasn't that it was not allowed, but it was like society just like dampened the mood.
I like the way you put that.
No, because that's the truth. The people think, oh, you were banned from expressing yourself, and it was like, no, there was nothing legal about it. Like, it was totally legal to do whatever you wanted, but the society just hindered you, and you are part of a fabric, and you cannot like cut yourself off of this thing. So might as well just either push a little bit against the social fabric or work with what you have. I think that's what everyone understood at the time. So imagine like being consistently and I witnessed this myself, where like, oh, you had families that burned photographs or burned film or burned whatever,
or ripped them up, right? My aunt did that. She did a lot of ripping of the photos,
so
right?
And it's very painful, but and a lot of people think, oh yeah, it's to save the souls. So the intention is there. There's a positive intention, but there is no understanding that you are eliminating memory. And how could society continue when it doesn't even have a memory of itself for time? Like when I, for example, look at my own parents, I think to myself, they're more, let's say, solid in their identity than I am. For me personally, I mean, now it is, don't get me wrong, but like when I was a teenager, it was like a consistent desire to try to understand, where am I in this world? A bit too, let's say, globalized. English is constantly in my life. Other, let's say, forms of cultural expressions are in my life. Like I would watch American TV and movies and stuff, but that's not really who I am. And then I look at and I hear speeches or poetry or whatever, and I also think, but that's not also really who I am. So where am I in this mix? I look at films from Egypt and I laugh, and there is a connection in language, but not in expression. It's not the same body language. It's not the same clothes. It's not the same just way of speech patterns, you know, like you start kind of really wanting this for yourself and missing it.
So with the Vision 2030, and our, our kind of mission to find expression, define culture, define who we are as Saudis, and to express that to the rest of the world, where do photos come into the play? Where do images come into the play, in the mix there?
I mean, when you have a renaissance, lots of visuals come out. So that's about it, you know? Like if I'm a fashion designer and I want to design a full line and sell it in the let's say global market, I want it to be very authentic. I need to go back to the archives. If I am an architect, I want to do what Zaha Hadid did and push it further. How can I do that? I have to go back to the archives. It's not enough to just look at written content. I think whenever it comes to the cultural industry, you have to really consider the fact that they heavily depend on visuals. And since we as a country, I mean, now there's a lot changing, and I'm very happy and very proud of all these changes. But at the moment, there is no cultural archive yet. They are starting to. I mean, a few years ago, the Ministry of Culture announced the Cultural Archive, which is an amazing thing. But they're obviously still working on it, and there's and you understand, you know, like archives don't just pop up in a day and then it's like, okay, I'm here. So it's obviously going to take 5-10 years for it to really build itself and sustain itself and kind of function normally. But if you really want to push this industry further, then you have to offer the creatives the chance to actually look and view the history. So I've had, for example, multiple people in the creative industry reach out to me for content, for the archives, for visuals. Sometimes it's not necessarily just visuals. Sometimes it's like, oh, I know. So I found this book in King Saud University with this title, blah, 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 blah. And the author mentioned a photograph. Can you find the photo? So
Can
it
you?
would be not always. But yeah, and sometimes it becomes very intimate. I mean, there are many requests that I get sometimes in the DMs where people ask me to find photos of their grandparents. And that always warms my heart because it's like I would love to. And not all the time, but there are times where we did find people's relatives. But yeah, sometimes so it can really range from something so intimate to something very public. So going back to the whole Vision 2030 question, I mean, you are creating, let's say, a new economy. And for you to do that, there are many things that you have to let go of. And there are many things that you have to start adopting in terms of going back through the history and checking things out. I mean, I'm so happy, by the way, every founding day or foundation day when people, and I notice that, okay, this is a bit TMI, but like I notice that it's like a month before my account starts being very active.
Oh, I love it.
not like me posting pictures, but like I start seeing people liking photos or like bookmarking the photos. And I'm like, oh, I'm so curious. What are you going to do with that photo? Or how are
Putting
you going to
costumes together?
What are you doing? And so sometimes I'm very happy, you know. It is a form of linking ourselves to the past. So it's not like what everyone thinks, and that's what frustrates me when I talk to people about 2030. They think, oh, so it's like a new me, new you kind of situation. It's like, no.
Yeah.
No, it's not that. It's a, I call it, it's a reclamation, a vision of reclamation, reclaiming the narrative, the story, everything. It's just time.
And we just did a segment on Founding Day, actually, and talked specifically about that. It's like, some of the things are not very old, right? We do talk about the first Saudi state in 1727, but people are bringing up cassette tapes and stereos and things that are just their past, right? And so it's like, what is my personal past, my personal history, my grandparents, and what does that mean to me? And I do think that it is so much reclaiming your own history and contextualizing it within the broader history of the country. And I think that that's a really important thing to recognize. And
yeah, absolutely. We really have never been given a chance for ourselves to actually sit down and look at the history. There was a German traveler in the 1800s that went to Saudi, and he just happened to meet my own great-grandfather somehow, and he painted him, which is the greatest thing I ever have. It's like a nice memory of me having like a visual of my grandpa. I've seen this before years ago, but in low quality. And every time it gets shared in like the family groups, it's kind of like captioned with, oh, he's great. Oh, he's that. Oh, he's that. And he is, it's my grandpa. No debate about that. But then in the German notes, it just made me really laugh because it is perspective at the end, where the guy just wrote, he was kind of cheap.
I love that.
Like there was an incident and they were fighting about it, and it was kind of like, calm down.
That's awesome.
So when I saw that, to me, I was kind of like, yeah, that humanizes my experience, because that shows to me that my grandpa isn't this kind of unattainable person that I can't connect to, he is a human at the end. And I think that's our issue in a lot of the ways we deal with our photographs. So to kind of make them unattainable as a human experience, to say, oh, this is solidified in time and you can't just comment about it or say anything about it.
Yeah. Well, honestly, I'm really excited to bring that human side of Saudi to the audience that's listening through our discussions. It was such an interesting discussion that we've just had, and I really appreciate your insights and cannot wait to have more discussions and references to some of these really interesting stories, and just to kind of understand our culture and our history and our human side through some of this. I'm really looking forward to more of this. So, Ghada, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.